Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. I stand before you tonight with a heavy heart as I report on the heartbreaking developments unfolding overnight in Iran. As of this morning, the regime's brutal crackdown has pushed the death toll to at least 646 brave souls, many of them young protesters under 30, gunned down or beaten in the streets of Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan and beyond. What began as economic despair in late December has erupted into a nationwide uprising against decades of oppression, with crowds defying internet blackouts, mass arrests, and live ammunition to demand freedom and justice. I feel their pain deeply. These are not just numbers. These are fathers, these are mothers, these are students, dreamers whose blood now stains the pavements in a desperate cry for change. Voices from inside describe unimaginable devastation, yet an unbreakable spirit which still endures. But now in a drastic escalation that I believe could tip the scales, the US President Donald Trump announced yesterday that any country continuing to trade with Iran will now face an immediate 25% tariff on all business with the United States. Now, India trades with Iran, and we are already at 50% trade sanctions with the United States. So does this mean that trade sanctions could rise to 75% in our case? Now, New Delhi will have to assess the situation closely, and there may not be very many options. But what is clear is this, and I want to talk a little bit more about this on the show. Global pressure on those who slaughter their own people is now fairly unrelenting, and the Iranian people's courageous stand echoes in my mind. How much more suffering must they endure before the world says enough is enough? We've got some fantastic guests with us. First up, Neda Soltani, member of the World Liberty Congress Leadership Council. Neda, thank you very much for being with us. What I've been doing over the last several days as we've been tracking this Iran story is to actually go through some of the key points. And I thought I would do that today as well, get your answers to some basic questions. So first up, what are you hearing about the current estimated death toll from the crackdown on protesters? Because there are numbers by activists and those fighting, and then the government says something else. What do you believe to be the truth?
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate raising awareness on the case of Iranian civilians who are protesting for their basic human rights of dignity and freedom. Unfortunately, the death toll is much higher than even us who knew imagined it to be. Late last night, we received a credible report that has now been also authenticated by Shirin Ebadi, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate,
yes,
that the death toll now has arrived to 12,000 people. These 12,000 people were alone massacred in a time span of 48 hours.
12,000 is what you're saying. That's stupendous. That's extremely, extremely high. But I mean, Shirin Ebadi, somebody I've spoken to, interviewed in the past as an extraordinary woman and leader and a credible source, she says yes, 12,000 people have been killed across the country.
Correct. And she also says, and also Masih Alinejad, who's a very well-known human rights and women's rights advocate, has also confirmed that even for Iranian regime standards, for the Mullah regime standards, this number is unprecedented. Killing 12,000 civilians, unarmed civilians, in a time span of 48 hours.
Okay. My next question to you, and we'll come back to that tragic news that you are sharing with us. How effective have the regime's measures, internet blackouts, curfews, shoot-to-kill orders, have these at all been successful in taking the crowds away? Or are people defying this still?
It is understandable that when the security forces start shooting into crowds indiscriminately with military-grade weapons, it scares every living human being.
Yes, of course.
However, The protests have not stopped. This is an uprising that is still continuing, perhaps not as widespread as for 2 days where there were calls for strike and protest, but it definitely is continuing. We saw videos again in several cities, including the capital, Tehran, but also cities in the south and in the north west of the country where protests were still ongoing.
Neda, is it your belief that this, if there is to be a regime change, a true revolution may be already happening, excuse me, it may not happen immediately, that this could be an internal uprising, a revolution, which could in fact last months before we see the change that you're talking about?
Well, of course, we all know that revolutions are marathons and not sprints. However, what we also know is that the regime has been extremely weakened and deteriorated. It has lost all its proxies in the region, that it spent years and years of the riches of the people of Iran on strengthening them. They are non-existent. And then during the last 12-day war, last June 2025, top military and IRGC personnel, the thinking heads of the regime's political and military organization have been eliminated. So the regime is also extremely weakened, and that can be the tipping point. Whether it happens tomorrow or whether it happens in a month or in a year is really something that I do not believe anybody can answer. Yeah. And it very much depends on the protests in Iran.
I'm also joined at this stage by Parissa Urquhart, a BAFTA-winning Iranian-Scottish documentary filmmaker who's watching all of these developments and is obviously deeply worried about what's taking place. Parissa, thank you very much for being with us. I'll just go to my next question, and I've been going through these basic questions, which is this: what are the main on-the-ground impacts that you're hearing from friends and family in Tehran, other parts of Iran? Food shortages, satellite disk confiscations, restrictions on basic phone calls. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Hi, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be in India. I'm here on holiday. I've been in touch with people I know who are actually stranded out with Iran. They're trying to get back, but their flights were cancelled. And I'm also in touch with the Scottish Iranian diaspora who are constantly trying to get through to their family. They finally managed to receive very short 1-minute calls this morning from family members, but when they've tried to call back, they can't get through. But at least that 1-minute call was family members saying they're okay. Many of them only heard just literally in the last hour, there's been about 12,000 murdered. But also as well, I have heard from some contacts that actually some cities have been taken over by activists already, 7 cities. I can't verify this. I'm trying to get it verified. And these activists are affiliated to Pahlavi. So I'm not sure if this is definite or not. And also as well that the head of the armed forces in Mashhad has been killed. But with regard to people on the ground, it's really hard to hear what their experiences are. But certainly one other person I spoke to has heard that the killing of these people, many of these bodies have been dumped into canals, and there was a situation of a diver going in and finding lots of bodies, other bodies that have been shot. The regime has taken to the place the families can pick them up, but they have to pay per bullet that's been put into that body. Yeah. To have their bodies returned.
Oh, it's absolutely shocking.
It's shocking. I'm speaking out because, really, there should be people from Iran speaking here, but they can't. And I just want as much support, international support, for all these people who are trying to protest, because these deaths can't go in vain. There needs to be international support and help. to support them making change so they can have democracy, human rights, equal rights between women and men, and a functioning economy so that they have hope for the future.
Sure. I'm also joined by Ambassador Ashok Sajjanar and Nirupama Soundarajan, the economist. And this actually brings me to the next question that we are looking at. What exactly did Trump announce about the new 25% tariff, Ambassador, on countries doing business with Iran, including its start date and main targets? I ask this because we already in India face 50% tariffs from the United States. So hypothetically, this means this will go up to 75% because we trade with Iran. That's untenable, obviously. Where does that leave New Delhi?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vishnu, for having me. You're right, 50% is the tariff that we are facing. But I think there are a couple of things that we need to remember here. Number one, that India does not really trade all that much with Iran. I think the last year, the figures that are available, I think two-way trade was about $1.68 billion. We exported about $1.4 billion, imported about $1.2 billion, and imported about $0.4 billion. We don't import any oil. You would remember that in the past, we have had a dependence of 10 to 12% of our total oil needs that have been coming from Iran. But when Mr. Trump, in his first tenure, he imposed sanctions on the Iranian oil in 2018, then by 2019, we stopped importing oil. So our trade relations are very, in terms of volumes and monetary terms, very small. And if we need, we can really, get away from it very quickly. Basically, it's rice, tea, and some fruits, etc., that we export, and some similar items, dry fruits, that we are importing, which is not all that very difficult to get out of. I think the basic, the countries that should really be worried, in my view, if that comes to being, are China, because China imports huge quantities. Even in 2018-19, when the sanctions were imposed on Iranian oil, China has continued to import oil, whether formally or through shadow fleets. And I understand that, lately its imports have been to the tune of about $22 billion of oil. And, it has also signed that $400 billion deal with Iran for, in terms of setting up the infrastructure, and which is something called loan for oil. So, that it will continue to receive oil from Iran.
Sure. Okay, half a second, Ambassador. Let me just keep the strike rotating. Nirupama Soundarajan, in fact, my final question on this program this evening in terms of the big points is, how have major players like China reacted? We heard Ambassador Sajjanar talk about a potential impact on China, but what is China saying? What is the likely impact of these tariff threats on global oil prices and trade?
I think, China will have to consider this quite carefully because they are Iran's largest trading partners. And with ongoing friction already between US and China happening, this is going to add another dimension to it, which is not going to be very pleasant. But overall, oil prices, if you see, I don't think there will be too much of a reaction now, because we must remember that, all the problems started about 1 month back. And there's been disruption in supply chains since then. So I think markets have had a little bit of time to adjust to that, so to speak. The recent disruption that we'll see vis-a-vis India will be largely, obviously, in the basmati rice trade. That will be the biggest one. But with oil, I don't think, not more than usual, except for, anytime there is any kind of global imbalance, that is there any threats of this nature, you will see reactions. But I think this time around, for 1 month, it's been happening. So the shocks may not be as severe. There will be a shock, but not as severe.
Nida, final question to you. You've spent a lifetime, as have so many others, like Parissa.
I can't.
So, Nida, I just wanted to ask you, when you see what's taking place on the ground, when you look at how women have been repressed in Iran, are you, in a sense, overjoyed at what is taking place, that this will mark the end of decades of repression, that women who have been so essential in Iranian society will finally get their place in the sun, that's bound to happen? You might be very close to that. So is that what is something that really, really inspires you, Neda?
The courage of the Iranian people, women, children, men, young and old, we are now in the third week of this uprising and revolution, if you will. The courage that they have shown must inspire the whole world, not just me as an Iranian. I do believe that, and of course, we also need to perhaps remind your audience, which I'm sure have in their collective memory, this is not the first time this is happening. 3 years ago, 2022,
yes,
we had the Women Life Freedom uprising and revolution, which was unfortunately did not succeed in toppling the regime. So here, once again, women are pivotal, and the Iranian women have shown time and again that they do not step back from fighting for their rights, the basic human right of dignity. And as your other Iranian Scottish guest mentioned, I apologize, I did not catch the name, that we want equality, and equality cannot be achieved under this regime. It has been clear from day one to now that we are 47 years after. And as heartbreaking and heart-wrenching it is to see people, civilians being slaughtered, it is inspiring. And we are all very hopeful that the future will offer better horizons, not just to women, but especially to women and the rest of that country of 90 million people.
Yeah. One of the greatest civilizations on earth, a country with so much, a prosperous nation at very much a crossroads. Where will this all lead? We'll have to wait and see. Perhaps it won't be immediate. Perhaps these changes might take time. So a note of caution over there as we report all of these fast-paced developments. But I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. These are momentous times in Iran. The ramifications truly global. Well, that's it then on Left, Right and Center from all of us here. Good night.